It started with a loud splash and Karen's cackling echoing through the night. I stared at my security camera feed, dumbfounded, as she and her teenage son lobbed dozens of balloons, some filled with glitter, others with some kind of chunky goo, straight into my pristine pool. I had just finished spending nearly $2,000 on the new filtration system, and here was the neighborhood menace treating my backyard like her own personal prank playground. The next morning, I found a soupy rainbow mess, clogged drains, and a note taped to my gate that simply read, "Lighten up, it's just decorations." I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or start mixing chemicals. That's when I decided, if Karen wanted to play stupid games, I'd give her a slimy prize she'd never forget. The week before had actually been peaceful, which, in my neighborhood, was a rare thing. I had just finished cleaning the yard, setting up new turf by the deck, and even planting some lemon trees by the fence line. My pool was sparkling, the sun was out, and for once the HOA hadn't sent me any ridiculous violation letters for things like having more than one bird feeder or owning an unapproved garden gnome. It was quiet, until it wasn't. Karen lived 2 houses down from me. She'd somehow made herself the self-declared HOA enforcer even though she wasn't officially elected to any position. She wore a whistle, patrolled the sidewalks like she was the neighborhood sheriff, and kept a printed list of code infractions in her purse. And whenever things seemed too calm, she just couldn't help herself. Earlier that Saturday, I'd hosted a small backyard cookout. A couple of friends, my cousin Ryan and my sister and her kids, had come over to swim and relax. Everyone was respectful, the music was low, and I even ended the party before dusk out of consideration for the neighbors. But that didn't stop Karen from showing up at the fence uninvited around noon. She pressed her face between the slats and called out like she was interrogating us. "Who authorized this gathering? Is this in the HOA social calendar?" I calmly told her it was a family event on private property, but she wasn't having it. "Pools are communal energy drains," she announced like a doomsday prophet, before storming off, fuming over who knows what. I didn't think much of it until the following morning when I walked out in flip-flops, coffee in hand, and saw my pool looking like a psychedelic swamp. The water was tinted orange, blue, and silver, with chunks of shredded latex and glittery sludge floating like soup toppings. At first, I thought it was some bizarre algae bloom, but then I noticed a torn piece of a balloon with "Happy Whatever" printed on it. I ran back inside and pulled up the overnight footage. The camera showed Karen and her lanky teenage son sneaking in from the alley around 2:15 a.m., climbing the fence like 2 drunk raccoons. They had a bag of balloons. Big, small, and even watermelons filled with what looked like cake batter. They laughed, danced, and threw every single one into the pool. Her son even did a cannonball in his clothes before climbing out and bolting. Then came the worst part. Karen wrote a note, taped it to my gate, and posed with it for a selfie like she was proud of the crime. I was stunned. Not just because she vandalized my property, but because she acted like it was some kind of joke. I sent the footage and photos to the HOA, assuming they'd be horrified and take immediate action. But I should have known better. The president of the HOA, Mr. Delman, emailed back saying, "We don't mediate personal disputes, and the balloons appear to be non-permanent." I pointed out the glitter clogging the filters, the food-like sludge in the pipes, and the damage to the brand-new pump system. Still, they shrugged it off. That's when Karen sent me a message through the community app. She wrote, "You're welcome for the festive decor. Pools are for sharing, not hoarding. Don't be so uptight." I swear I nearly cracked a tooth from grinding it so hard. I spent the rest of that day draining the pool, scrubbing the tiles, and trying not to imagine throwing Karen into a pit of eels. My cousin Ryan came over and helped me dismantle the clogged filter system. We both worked in tech, so we were no strangers to problem-solving. While we cleaned, I ranted. Ryan just nodded, then said something that stuck with me. "If she wants chaos, give her chaos, but make it poetic." That night, the idea started forming. I didn't want to stoop to her level. I wanted to climb 10 levels above it and make her regret every stupid balloon she ever filled. I pulled out my sketchpad and started scribbling designs. Ryan brought out his tablet. We stayed up until 2 a.m. brainstorming what I would later call Operation Slime. But before I got too far, I decided to give the HOA one last chance. I requested a formal hearing, submitted the footage, and demanded that Karen at least be fined or reprimanded. The hearing was a joke. Karen showed up in a lemon-colored blazer, wearing sunglasses indoors like a soap opera villain, and claimed the footage was digitally manipulated, and that the balloons were symbolic protest art about water usage. She even passed around a ridiculous handout titled, "Why Pools Oppress the Earth." I couldn't believe it. Delman just sighed and said it was an unfortunate misunderstanding and closed the case. Karen smirked at me as she left. That's when I knew. Slime was no longer a plan. It was a mission. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Karen strutted past my house every morning with her ridiculous dog named Muffin, who barked at air and wore a rhinestone vest. She waved smugly as if she'd won. But I was already working behind the scenes. I called in a favor from my cousin's old chemistry buddy, who once worked on a kids' TV game show that featured slime. I explained what I wanted. Something safe, something that wouldn't damage the pool, but something visually horrifying. He laughed for a full minute and then said, "Oh, I've got just the thing." We started testing different mixtures in my garage. Cornstarch, guar gum, food coloring, essential oils to keep it from smelling. It had to be thick but filter-friendly. It had to be shocking but not harmful. Eventually, we got the formula right, a sickly green, semi-translucent slime that looked like it came out of a cartoon villain's cauldron. I bought a storage tank, installed a remote trigger valve, and hooked it into the auxiliary pipes of the pool system. I even tested a partial batch late at night and watched with glee as the jets pumped out a glorious green stream. It worked. It was beautiful. It was ready. But before pulling the trigger, I needed the perfect setup. Karen loved attention. She loved being seen. So I gave her a reason to be seen. I sent out invites to a neighborhood reconciliation brunch, hosted at my pool. I made it sound formal, friendly, and guilt-free. I printed fake flyers, posted one at the community board, and even messaged Karen directly. She responded in seconds, delighted to attend. Glad you've come to your senses. She had no idea I was about to unleash a nightmare that would go down in HOA history. The night before the so-called neighborhood reconciliation brunch, I stood on my deck staring at the moonlit pool, calm and silent as if it too were holding its breath. The real water had already been drained earlier that day, replaced by a holding tank of perfectly engineered, lime green, eco-safe slime hidden beneath a fake turf patch along the fence. The piping was set. The valves were connected. All that remained was the trigger, a small remote disguised as a smartwatch button on my wrist. It had been tested twice in silence, in the dead of night, with only Ryan and me watching as the goo slithered out like a monster waking from sleep. The pool was still currently filled with clean, clear water. But the moment I pressed the switch, the backup tank would override the primary pump, and within 90 seconds, the entire pool would transform into a fluorescent bog that looked like it was straight out of a mad scientist's nightmare. My hands had been busy that week, but my mind had been even busier. Karen had no clue just how far I'd gone with preparation. I had consulted my cousin's chemist friend 3 more times, tweaking the mixture's thickness to make it slippery but not gelatinous, easy to clean, yet utterly grotesque. We even added a drop of safe but pungent plant extract to give it a strange marshy smell, the kind of thing that would haunt memories. I wasn't aiming to harm her, just humiliate her, and capture every second of it. The invites had been my masterstroke. Knowing Karen's need to flaunt authority, I made the flyer look like an official HOA event, complete with phrases like restorative unity, shared responsibility, and celebrating togetherness by the water. I posted it on the HOA's community app and made sure it appeared passive enough to fly under Delman's radar. I also extended the invitation to a few of the more reasonable neighbors, including Samir, a quiet man who worked in municipal code enforcement, and Elsie, a sweet but brutally honest retired teacher who'd lived in the area for 30 years. Most of them knew Karen's antics but rarely had proof. I was about to give them front-row seats to poetic justice. On the morning of the event, I got up early and double-checked everything. Ryan was already over, sipping coffee and testing the pressure valve. He gave me a nod of approval and smirked. "Today's the day, my guy. We are rewriting HOA history." I set up the backyard with just the right blend of subtlety and bait. A table with fresh fruit and croissants near the fence. Fold-out chairs under the pergola. A Bluetooth speaker quietly playing smooth jazz. It looked like a peaceful suburban get-together. But the real show was sitting silently under 3 inches of water, waiting for the green light. At exactly 10:45 a.m., the first guests trickled in. Samir and Elsie arrived early, bringing a bottle of lemonade and an amused curiosity. I welcomed them and gave them the seats with the clearest view of the pool. The others followed. 2 neighbors from across the street, a single dad named Tom and his daughter, and finally, with perfect theatrical timing, Karen arrived. She wore a ridiculous sun hat with a veil, oversized sunglasses, and a white jumpsuit that looked like it cost a month's salary. Muffin the dog pranced beside her in a matching vest. She held a mimosa in a fancy glass and waved like she was arriving at a press conference. "Ah, the prodigal host returns to civility," she said loudly, giving me an overly familiar pat on the back, as if we were old friends. I forced a smile and gestured toward the lounge chair I had strategically placed closest to the pool's edge. "Make yourself at home," I said, while Ryan turned away to hide a laugh. Karen plopped down, crossed her legs, and declared loudly, "See? All it takes is maturity and perspective. I always say, forgiveness is the backbone of community." Her voice carried across the yard, and I saw Elsie roll her eyes while Samir simply sipped his drink. Karen, clearly riding the high of imagined victory, started narrating the morning like she was live-streaming an awards ceremony. "When I first moved into this neighborhood, I knew it needed strong leadership. Some people might misunderstand firmness for harshness, but really, I'm just trying to instill discipline." She went on for a full 5 minutes about her role in balancing property values and neighborhood morale. At some point, she even referred to herself as a cultural moderator. I was tempted to hit the button right then, but I had to time it right. The moment came when she stood up and walked dramatically to the edge of the pool. She dipped a toe in and gasped, "Perfect temperature. Isn't it divine?" She turned to the others and said, "Everyone should appreciate a pool like this. But of course, not everyone deserves one. That's why it's so important to have gatekeeping." I looked at Ryan, who gave me the tiniest nod. I raised my hand casually to scratch my wrist, and pressed the button. It started subtle. A soft gurgle beneath the surface. A shift in pressure. Then the jets along the pool walls began to bubble and spit, releasing streams of thick, green sludge into the water. Within seconds, the pristine blue transformed into swamp green. Karen turned just in time to see a wave of slime ooze from the shallow end and spread toward her. Her first reaction was confusion. What is that?" she said, taking a step back. Then her sandal slipped on the now-slick tile and, with a squeal, she tumbled backward straight into the rising green goo. The yard erupted into stunned silence, followed by stifled laughter. Karen surfaced from the pool like a character in a sci-fi horror film. Her hat was soaked, her sunglasses hanging off one ear, and her entire white outfit stained green. Muffin barked wildly at the pool while Karen flailed and shouted, "What is this? What is this filth? What did you do to my clothes?" Ryan calmly stepped forward and said, "Relax. It's just eco-slime. Non-toxic, biodegradable. Safe enough to eat but not quite tasty." Karen scrambled to the edge, slipped again, and managed to crawl out on all fours, leaving a slimy trail behind her. The guests could no longer hold back. Elsie actually clapped, while Tom covered his daughter's eyes and laughed. Samir took a picture and muttered, "This will be good for the next HOA meeting." Karen looked around, panting and humiliated, then spotted one of my security cameras recording the entire scene. She shrieked, "You planned this! You set me up!" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Oh, you mean like when you decorated my pool at 2 in the morning with garbage balloons?" She froze, realizing she had no comeback. The slime dripped from her sleeves, soaking into the deck. Her ego visibly crumbled as she pulled off her soggy hat and stomped toward the gate. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You've declared war." And then she was gone, leaving behind a trail of green footprints and a crowd of very satisfied neighbors. As the slime slowly settled, Ryan turned to me and said, "Think she got the message?" I exhaled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "Oh, she got it. And she's going to remember it every time she buys a white jumpsuit." I looked around the yard, saw the joy, the laughter, and the sense of neighborhood unity Karen could never manufacture. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming peace. And it was only the beginning. The slime incident should have been the end of it, a one-time event burned into Karen's memory and maybe into her social standing. But people like Karen don't disappear quietly. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was humiliated in front of people she once controlled. And humiliation for someone like her wasn't a wound, it was a grudge that festered. I underestimated how petty she could get, how deep her need for dominance really ran. It wasn't even 24 hours after her slime bath before she started retaliating. She began with a message slipped under my door, handwritten in cursive and scented with overpriced perfume. It read, "Your childish prank will have consequences. You have been warned. Karen." I didn't respond. I didn't even dignify it with a second read. But that didn't mean she was finished. The first strike came the next morning. My trash cans, usually picked up without issue, were left untouched while every other house's bins were cleared. I called sanitation and they confirmed that someone had called in a complaint, claiming my cans were toxic due to chemical runoff. When I asked them to clarify, they paused, then admitted off the record that the report came anonymously from a woman who said she was a neighborhood environmental officer. That had Karen written all over it. I had to drag my bins down to the station myself and prove they were clean. Then 2 days later, a city inspector showed up unannounced to review suspicious structural modifications to my pool area. Apparently someone had called in saying I had illegally rerouted plumbing. I showed the inspector my permits, my install receipts, and even the specs from the chemical lab for the slime formula, which was, of course, all legal and non-damaging. The inspector actually chuckled when I told him the full story. "Sounds like someone's got a vendetta," he said. "Want me to file a counter-report?" I thanked him and declined. I wasn't going to play the game her way. But the next move she made forced my hand. Her teenage son, the same one who helped her balloon bomb my pool, decided it was his turn to contribute. Late one night I heard the crunch of gravel near the back fence. I flipped on the cameras just in time to see him spray painting a crude image and some foul words across the wooden planks facing the street. What he didn't know was that I had recently coated the entire fence with a nanopolymer I got from Ryan's tech job, a slick film designed to repel graffiti. The paint barely stuck and began sliding off in streaks before he could even finish his profanity. I watched the footage, stunned at how casually he vandalized my property. He finished, looked smug for half a second, then noticed the paint wasn't holding. He tried again, growing visibly frustrated. Then the motion light kicked on and he bolted, tripping over his own feet as he scrambled into the bushes. The footage was gold. I saved it, backed it up to 3 drives, and sent a copy to the local police. I wasn't vindictive, but this crossed the line from petty to criminal. I filed an official report. The officer who arrived to take my statement? The same one who'd seen the slime video. He recognized Karen's name immediately and let out a tired sigh. "You wouldn't believe how many times we've had minor complaints from that household," he said. "Usually nothing actionable. This, though, This we can work with. Within 48 hours, Karen was served with a notice for property damage, failure to supervise a minor, and possible HOA violations related to harassment and defamation. The next HOA meeting, usually boring and sparsely attended, was standing room only. People who had never shown interest before came out of the woodwork, most of them curious to see how the infamous slime video and the spray paint incident would unfold in a public setting. Karen, dressed head to toe in beige like she was attending a royal funeral, arrived 10 minutes late and avoided all eye contact. She sat in the back, arms crossed, face pinched like a bitter lemon. Delman, the HOA president, started the meeting trying to keep things polite, but it quickly spiraled when a motion was introduced to suspend Karen's privileges as an HOA enforcer. The motion passed almost instantly. No one defended her. Not even her old clique of retired gossip queens, who now looked uncomfortable just being near her. Then came the best part. Samir, the code enforcement officer I'd invited to the brunch, stood up and read a prepared statement. He had reviewed the footage, reviewed the city permits, and had personally verified that Karen's claims about my pool being illegal were false. He also confirmed that false code complaints can result in fines. That sparked murmurs across the room. Karen tried to speak but was shut down by a unanimous vote. Delman looked exhausted. For once, he wasn't defending her. Instead, he quietly introduced a proposal for a respectful conduct clause to be added to the HOA bylaws. I knew what that meant. It was the HOA's version of installing an ejector seat. But Karen, ever the drama queen, didn't just take the loss quietly. She stormed out halfway through the meeting, barking at everyone about lawsuits and conspiracies. The next day, she posted a long rant on the community forum accusing me of cyberbullying, defamation, and psychological torment via theatrical pool sabotage. The post was so absurd that someone screenshotted it and sent it to a Reddit page. Within hours, it went viral. Memes exploded across the internet. A gif of her flailing in the green slime was suddenly being used as a reaction on group chats. Someone dubbed it with a cartoon villain laugh and edited her into a swamp monster. Even my teenage niece texted me saying, "Uncle, you broke the internet." Karen deactivated all her social media within a week. She stopped walking Muffin near my house. Her friends stopped coming over. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt peaceful again. But the real cherry on top came 2 weeks later when a small "for sale" sign appeared on her lawn. No announcement, no party, no parade, just a quiet exit strategy from a woman who finally realized the whole neighborhood had turned against her. In the meantime, my inbox exploded with messages of support. Neighbors thanked me for standing up to her. A local news channel even reached out for an interview, which I declined, choosing peace over more publicity. But I did host a small pool party for those who supported me during the ordeal. I called it the Redemption Bash. No slime this time, just good music, grilled food, and laughter. Ryan made green jello just for the joke, and Elsie showed up wearing a shirt that read Team Slime. Looking around my backyard during that party, it hit me that I hadn't just won against Karen. I had helped flip the entire energy of the neighborhood. People were smiling, talking again, not living in fear of fake citations or passive-aggressive notes on their doors. One small act of calculated revenge, done right, had sparked a quiet rebellion. And while Karen's chapter was finally closing, I knew there was still one last power move I could make, one she wouldn't see coming. Something that would cement the lesson forever. That thought made me smile. Because in my world, slime was just the beginning. Even after Karen's social exile, she couldn't let it go. The "for sale" sign in her front yard should have been the symbol of her surrender, a quiet admission that the war she started had consumed her. But people like Karen don't go down with grace. They dig in their heels, drag others down with them, and twist every embarrassment into victimhood. What should have been a natural fade into irrelevance instead became a bizarre second act. Just when the neighborhood started feeling light again, peaceful and laughter-filled, she launched her final campaign. And this time, she aimed not just to ruin my reputation but to drag the entire community back into her miserable orbit. It began with a fake cease and desist letter. She didn't hire a lawyer, of course, but printed a generic online template and added her name at the bottom in cursive. The envelope arrived folded wrong and smelling of lavender soap. The letter accused me of defamation, public endangerment, mental anguish, emotional distress, and, for good measure, psychological manipulation through chemical warfare. I read it aloud to Ryan, and we nearly choked laughing. She cited neighborhood bylaws she clearly misunderstood and claimed she would be seeking monetary damages for pool-related trauma. The page ended with a ridiculous ultimatum: remove all surveillance cameras, issue a public apology on the community app, and submit to re-education on respectful neighbor conduct. She must have thought she was running North Korea. I forwarded the letter to a real attorney, Sarah, a friend of mine who specialized in civil harassment claims. She took one look and said, "This is nonsense. And also possibly illegal." Apparently, impersonating legal action without a licensed attorney can backfire badly if used to intimidate someone. She advised me to send a cease and desist right back, but I had a better idea. Instead of dragging this out in court, I wanted the neighborhood to see just how deep Karen's delusion had gone. So I printed her fake letter, laminated it, and placed it next to a small sign in my yard that read, "Karen's Final Fantasy, now showing." I added a QR code linking to a private video explaining the entire slime saga from start to finish. I called it The Balloons, the Slime, and the Meltdown. It was narrated by Ryan in a mock documentary tone and quickly became the HOA's unofficial bedtime story. But Karen wasn't finished. Her son, still somehow under the impression that this was a family crusade, decided to make one last move. One night, just after 2 a.m., he tried sneaking back into my yard with what appeared to be a bottle of ketchup and mustard. His plan, I later learned, was to ruin the patio furniture and maybe even spray condiment graffiti on the deck. What he didn't know was that I had upgraded my security. Infrared sensors lit up the moment he stepped onto the grass. Floodlights snapped on. My voice rang out through the speakers. "Wrong yard, buddy." Again. He froze like a deer, dropped the bottle, and bolted without even trying to hide his face. All of it was caught on 4 different cameras, one of which got such a perfect angle that it could have been used for a school portrait. This time, I didn't file a police report immediately. I waited. 2 days later, I attended another HOA meeting, this one even more packed than the last. News of the condiment incident had already spread. Rumors flew like wildfire, each one more ridiculous than the last. Some claimed Karen was organizing a rogue committee to take over the HOA board. Others said she'd contacted a conspiracy podcast to tell her story. What was true, however, was that she had cornered several board members privately, trying to pressure them into introducing a motion that would ban security cameras used in a harassing fashion. They declined unanimously. At the meeting, I stepped up with a calmness I hadn't felt in weeks. I played the new footage. Karen's son, ketchup in hand, darting across the yard like he was auditioning for a fast food horror film. The room broke into gasps and murmurs. Delman didn't even wait for a discussion. He made a motion to bar Karen's family from attending further meetings until a formal review could be held. It passed without a single objection. Karen, who was sitting in the back with crossed arms, stood up and tried to speak. "This is a vendetta," she hissed. "This is neighbor-on-neighbor warfare." But no one cared anymore. Even her few remaining allies lowered their heads and stayed silent. She stormed out again, but this time no one followed her. No one even looked up from the agenda sheet. That night I received a knock at my door. It was Tom from across the street, the single dad who had once stayed out of neighborhood drama entirely. He handed me a 6-pack and said, "You're doing the Lord's work, man. That slime thing? Legendary." I thanked him, and we sat on the porch for a while, talking about the bizarre months that had passed. Other neighbors soon joined. Elsie brought cookies. Samir shared stories of other HOA disputes he'd dealt with in his job. We laughed, we told stories, and before long, it felt like the neighborhood had turned into a real community again. Not one ruled by Karen's clipboard and paranoia, but one built on mutual respect, understanding, and yes, a little bit of slime. Karen's last act came quietly. No more public outbursts. No more fake letters. Instead, she started preparing to move. I knew because I saw the moving truck arrive before sunrise one morning. 2 workers loaded her furniture while she paced the yard on the phone. She didn't wave. She didn't speak to anyone. She just supervised everything like a defeated general retreating from a lost battle. By afternoon, she was gone. The "for sale" sign came down, replaced by a "sold" sticker slapped on with what looked like frustration. A couple weeks later, a young couple moved in. Friendly, soft-spoken, and completely unaware of the madness they had narrowly missed. But I wasn't done yet. I knew the perfect way to bring this whole saga full circle. With Karen gone, I organized a new HOA-approved event. I called it the Slime Bash Redemption. This time, it wasn't about revenge. It was about celebration. We decorated the yard in green streamers, set up a slime-themed snack bar, and played edited clips of the slime incident on a loop for those who hadn't seen it live. There was no actual slime in the pool, of course. Just sparkling water, good music, and the freedom to enjoy our space without fear of being watched or judged. Neighbors who had never attended events before showed up. Kids wore green goggles and played slime tag on the lawn. People brought food, laughter echoed from yard to yard, and somewhere between the jokes and the jello shots, the weight of months of tension melted away. Ryan stood by the grill, flipping burgers while casually mentioning he'd been asked to consult on a slime-themed mobile game. I half believed him. That night, as the party died down and the last guests wandered home, I sat by the pool with a drink in hand, watching the lights ripple across the water. I thought about everything that had happened, how a few balloons had turned into a battle for the soul of the neighborhood, how a bucket of slime had tipped the scales, how even the most absurd retaliation could evolve into something. Weeks passed after the Slime Bash redemption, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it could breathe again. Without Karen's constant complaints, self-appointed authority, and unwanted patrols, the community slowly found its rhythm. Yards that were once inspected with a magnifying glass were now filled with laughter, impromptu weekend hangouts, and neighbors helping each other without fear of being cited for breaking imaginary rules. It was like some invisible fog had lifted, revealing a neighborhood that had always wanted to be friendly, open, and stress-free, but had been stifled by one woman's mission to dominate it all. I had no intention of becoming a hero or a symbol, but people began to see me that way, and frankly, it felt good to know the fight had meant something. Karen's house sold fast, probably because the listing agent conveniently left out the part where the previous owner had declared psychological warfare over a swimming pool. The new couple, Sarah and Dave, were about as opposite from Karen as anyone could get. Within a day of moving in, they'd knocked on my door with a tray of muffins and a note that simply said, "Excited to finally be in a normal neighborhood." I didn't even have to explain the past. Someone had already filled them in. They said they'd seen the slime video during their house search and joked that it was part of the reason they were drawn to the place. They appreciated the spirit of a neighborhood that stood up to nonsense. That was all I needed to hear to know we'd get along just fine. Things didn't just return to normal, they improved. The HOA meetings, once quiet affairs dominated by Karen's passive-aggressive monologues, became open forums for actual improvements. Neighbors brought in real ideas, from playground upgrades to setting up a communal garden. Even Delman, the formerly tired and detached HOA president, started taking initiative. He approached me one evening during a walk and asked if I'd consider running for a seat on the board. I told him I wasn't sure I wanted that kind of responsibility, especially after everything that had happened. He just smiled and said, "Sometimes the best people for the job are the ones who never wanted it." I still didn't say yes, but I started thinking about it. If Karen had taught us anything, it was that power in the wrong hands turns community into a battleground. Maybe it was time to ensure that power stayed in the right hands moving forward. One afternoon, Ryan and I were working on resealing the deck when we got a knock at the gate. It was a delivery guy with a large package and a puzzled look. He handed over a wrapped crate and said it had been ordered anonymously for me, marked as a gift. Inside was a professionally printed sign carved from weather-treated cedar. In big letters it read, "The pool that broke Karen." Below it, someone had engraved the date of the slime incident. We laughed until we cried. I mounted it on the back fence by the lemon trees where it could be seen but not obnoxiously displayed. It became a quiet legend in the neighborhood, a badge of victory in the most absurd war we'd ever known. The story could have ended there, but life had one last surprise. A local YouTube content creator who focused on suburban drama had somehow gotten a hold of the full video archive of the balloon attack, the slime retaliation, the HOA meeting clips, and even Karen's ketchup ambush. I still don't know who leaked it, but within days, the full video was edited into a mini documentary titled The Slime War of Evergreen Lane. It exploded. Within a week, the video had over 5 million views. Commenters called it the most satisfying story of petty justice they'd ever seen. Some even asked if it was scripted because it was too perfectly chaotic. Ryan got recognized at his local gym. A woman asked if he was the green jello guy. We both laughed at how surreal it all became. Then came the emails. Hundreds of them. People from other HOA-run neighborhoods writing to thank us for giving them hope. A man from Arizona said he played the video during his own HOA dispute, hearing to show what happens when people fight back with wit instead of violence. Another woman from Florida said she printed out my laminated sign and hung it in her garage as motivation. A teacher even reached out asking for permission to show it in her media ethics class. The idea that our neighborhood prank had turned into a symbol for something bigger than us was hilarious and humbling at the same time. But the best moment came when I got an unexpected phone call. The city's Office of Community Relations had reviewed the footage and the surrounding story and wanted to feature the neighborhood in a segment for their community newsletter. Not just for the drama, but for the recovery. The way we rebuilt, connected, and even improved after the conflict. I agreed under one condition, that it not focus on me but the whole neighborhood. They honored that request, and soon enough, we had photographers capturing the new garden plots, the mural on the back wall that some of the teens painted, and even Muffin, who had mysteriously been left behind by Karen and was now happily adopted by Elsie. Yes, even the dog found redemption. By the time autumn rolled in, the neighborhood had fully transformed. We hosted a harvest dinner in the common area, complete with a bonfire, pumpkin carving, and potluck tables stretching down the block. People shared food, stories, and laughter like they'd lived on the same street for decades. Kids who had never been allowed to visit each other's homes under Karen's rule were now riding bikes freely from one yard to another. And for the first time in a long while, there was no fear of notes on doors or midnight balloon raids. Just people living like neighbors should. Ryan and I sat on the porch late one evening, sipping cider and watching the flicker of porch lights across the street. He nudged me and said, "You know, if you do run for the board, your campaign slogan should be 'Keep it slimy.'" I laughed so hard I nearly spit out my drink. We talked about what came next. Not revenge, not war, but how to keep this momentum alive. We tossed around ideas for a neighborhood newsletter, maybe even a podcast. Slime and Sanity with Ryan and me as co-hosts. It sounded stupid, which of course made it perfect. In the days that followed, I quietly packed away the last of the slime supplies, storing them in the garage, not because I needed them again, but because they had become a piece of history. A reminder that sometimes, standing up to bullies requires more than words. Sometimes it takes a little creativity, a touch of theatrics, and just enough nerve to turn the tables without losing your integrity. Karen taught us all a lesson, even if she never intended to. She taught us what it looks like when power goes unchecked, and what happens when good people stop tolerating bad behavior. Now when I walk past my pool, I don't just see water. I see a line in the sand. A turning point. The moment when a community chose fun over fear, unity over tyranny. And if one day someone else tries to rise up with a whistle, a clipboard, and a head full of rules no one agreed to, well, let's just say the green slime tank may be empty, but the legend is always full.